We always put security as a big topic and it always comes last.
The most important person that needs to be happy is the developer.
Yeah. And so you have like a scale challenge coupled with a security challenge as well, because I don't think it makes sense to have a management tool that only manages our stuff. But what Rancher is doing is simplifying the management of Kubernetes environments.
Try to reduce the vendor lock-in, be agnostic, have tools to really be independent and stay independent. Hello and welcome to the next Adfinis Open Talk. My name is Nicolas, I'm the CEO and CTO of Adfinis. Right next to me I have Lukas, and today we have very cool mood boards as well. And big thank to Lukas Bickel, who created a couple of very cool things. And we will play a lot with those. It's a pleasure to also welcome today Thomas di Giacomo, Chief Technology and Product Officer of SUSE.
First of all, I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for having me. It feels like home, not only because it's Switzerland, but also because of the partnership and the relationship we've been having together along the years. So I'm very happy to be here.
FYI, if you want to jump to one of the chapters, Annie will put some chapter marks in there, so you can actually just jump to one of the questions that you're interested in. So let me start with our first question. Are you more swimming in the river or in the lake?
Swimming in the ocean.
Okay, okay.
Well, so are you more a person that is up for lazy holidays, just lying on the beach doing nothing, or are you one that always needs to explore the world, needs to find something new?
During holidays, I'm lazy.
So what about your favorite place in the world? Do you have one?
I have many.
Okay,
So,
tell us the top three.
Top three. I love like Southeast Asia a lot. And well, even Japan, it's not Southeast too much, but I love being in Asia, I love being in Europe, and I love being in North America as well. So that's a lot. And different cities, so actually diversity is good for me. So it's going to be hard to stay in one place for retiring, or like, I don't know, I will travel.
What is your favorite place?
Well, for me it would be the ocean. I just realized that during the holidays that I don't know why I made the mistake to move to Switzerland because they don't have an ocean here.
And you, Nicolas, where would you?
Well, I grew up in Interlaken, which is a very nice place. It has mountains for skiing, it has lakes for swimming. I would go with Interlaken actually.
Yeah?
Yeah.
It's not too cold, like is it?
No.
Okay.
I really like cold actually.
What is your most amusing sentence you know in Swiss German?
Oh. Like, even in German, I'm trying to avoid German, Swiss German, because my colleagues at SUSE otherwise they make fun of me. So I stick to French and English.
Okay, okay. I think we should introduce you to our little collection that Annie prepared. But I think we should actually try the first one.
Shall I read it?
Yes, you should. And I will make sure that everybody gets a sip. So the first one that we have is this nice bottle.
Kavalan Classic, which is a single malt from Taiwan that is aged in American oak bourbon berries after distillation and has a particularly fruity taste. That is what my notes say. And Thomas should know about it.
Actually, yeah, I've been there. So I think it's northeast of Taipei in Taiwan. And I didn't know about that, so we have engineers in Taiwan because, well, you get access to the hardware and firmware, so we have engineering people, a great team there, and they took me one day to visit the Kavalan distillery. They do gin as well, but very good single malt whiskey. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming. Cheers, Lukas. You mentioned our partnership, and I'd like to also comment on that. SUSE is actually the oldest partnership we have at Adfinis, and we will have our 10-year anniversary somewhere next year. So
cool.
Very nice collaboration. Thanks a lot for being a strong believer also in the open source mindset. We all know the hard work that you're doing at SUSE to really push the boundaries that open source brings to the enterprise, and we're actually very impressed what you're doing, and also with the recent acquisition you made, and then also putting the code open source. We will talk about this later on. Very good job, awesome work there, and
Thank you.
let's continue this for the next at least 100 years, I would say.
10 years more.
Yes, at least. I would say let's discuss some technical questions, some market questions. Where are we heading with the whole open source and enterprise IT? What is SUSE doing there? How can you actually also help customers? What are the pain points that we see out there? What do you think about starting with Rancher?
Yeah, absolutely.
You agree?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we, of course, know Rancher since many years, but since it was not a SUSE technology back then, we never used it. So we said, no, we will stick with what SUSE is doing. Maybe you can explain a little bit how you see the value and value proposition that Rancher brings. Or how does it itself set apart from other Kubernetes platforms?
So there's a couple of things that were very exciting for us in the discussion with Rancher. First of all, they also come with a very similar open source backgrounds, and if you look at all the things that Rancher did and does today, it's always starting with open source, getting adoption, getting feedback from users. So it's very open. It's not something that they design and develop behind closed doors and then throw away over the fence to see if people will. So that was very important for us. And then I think Rancher, they really cracked the key issue with Kubernetes. Is not Kubernetes. There's a lot of work that has been done in Kubernetes and still ongoing. But what Rancher is doing is simplifying the management of Kubernetes environments. And most of the time, you don't only have one cluster, you have multiple clusters. Most of the time, it's not only in your data center, but you might have that on public cloud or in different offices if you're a large company or at the factory. It's not only that. I think that Rancher, they were the pioneer of that. And it's still years ahead in a way, so that you can, with Rancher, you know that you can scale, you can have and use cloud native in many different ways, in different setups, and you will have something to help you manage it. So having said all of that, there's still value in Kubernetes itself from a software infrastructure standpoint, but Kubernetes is coming from a cloud technology, which is probably not the best way to do cloud containerized workload management at the edge, where you have lightweight systems, or like Raspberry Pis, but even small racks or stuff like that. And so the work done on K3s to simplify Kubernetes, make it like a single binary 50 meg, or very small, very easy to deploy, to make it accessible outside cloud use cases, was something very exciting that we saw in Rancher.
Yeah, that's very interesting also to see for all those IoT workloads that we're seeing out there, and it's a very big and growing market. So I think K3s is really important there. Lukas, what is your experience with Rancher and the surrounding technology?
Well, for me, it was always interesting how they approached certain problems, because they always saw the multi-cluster problem.
Yeah.
Because what I saw in the Kubernetes community is this: we started with very big clusters, and there are still a few companies out there that are running very big clusters. And one thing that is also for me very interesting, and that I love very much, and that is one of the reasons, the areas where K3s is also working very well, is even running Kubernetes on my workstation.
Yeah.
Because there are certain things, I can't test the full production environment, but just for playing around and trying stuff out, nothing is quicker and more accessible than my workstation. And so I love running Kubernetes on my workstation as well.
Yeah, easy to download and install on your laptop.
And I believe the understanding of multi-cloud has changed. And so what is your understanding? What is SUSE's understanding of multi-cloud?
Maybe one way to define multi-cloud is the use of different public clouds. And I'm not only thinking about the hyperscalers, like not only about Azure, AWS, and Google, but also in Europe, we have a lot of regional clouds from OVH, because I'm saying that because I'm French as well, but are the telcos like Deutsche Telekom or Swisscom, they have their clouds, Ali Cloud in China, so there are many, right?
Even smaller, we have.
Even smaller.
I know at least 2 cloud providers in Switzerland that are just in Switzerland.
Yeah. And so that's multi-clouds, and sometimes people are referring to hybrid clouds, So multi-cloud, let's say it's multiple public clouds or clouds you're not managing yourself. And hybrid cloud, that's when you also manage your own cloud. You have a private cloud. Say you're, I don't know, BMW, and you're running your own data centers. Then you have some workloads and data on site, on premises. And then you still use public clouds, different ones, so that's hybrid clouds. And there are many, many reasons why somebody will do that. So like you could think that it's adding a lot of complexity. I mean, you need to compare, right? It's like when you buy a car, then you need a house. But it's actually a big driver, but I think it's not only that. So depending on your use cases, your needs, all the clouds are not the same. There are clouds that are better for some of the specific workloads you want to run, and sometimes it will change as well over time. So yeah, I mean, you should not like tie yourself to one cloud because you're cutting yourself from innovation from other clouds. And the other thing I'm seeing a lot, I don't know if you see that in Switzerland as well, probably yes, but companies are not a standalone entity. They are made of smaller companies, they do acquisitions, and so they come with different IT stacks and they come with different software stacks and different clouds.
Yeah.
So, and sometimes it doesn't make sense to align everybody on the same clouds. You want to keep things different as well. So it's here to stay, and it can be very complex, actually, because not all clouds are the same. So to me, one of the things I'm telling SUSE partners and customers, you have to be very intentional on what you do with public clouds in terms of API. There are things that are standards. So you could argue that Kubernetes, AKS, EKS, GKE are pretty much the same. If you start to use specific AWS API, that's okay if you want to use Lambda or whatever, but then you have to realize that your workload might not be as portable as it used to be before using the specific hyperscaler API, because then you have a dependency on that, which is okay depending on what you want to do. But you have to be also aware of that before you go into that direction, because then it becomes very difficult to do something different. You've done it.
I believe if you want to reap the benefits of each cloud provider, you sometimes have to use APIs that are special to them. So would you say, what is the best approach to tackle the complexity that you talked about of having to deal with multiple cloud providers?
Yeah, actually, we have a couple of guides that we put together ourselves that I can advertise as well. There's a buyer's guide for a multi-cloud solution, and an ebook called Buyer's Guide to Enterprise Kubernetes Management Platform, which I think we will provide the link in the video description. It's comparing Red Hat OpenShift, I don't know what that is, VMware Tanzu, Google Anthos, and SUSE Rancher. And obviously you should go SUSE Rancher, but you can read the book to understand why. And then we also have a guide together, a Gorilla guide, that explains and share more details about Kubernetes with Rancher in the context of multi-cloud, but not only. And again, it will also be provided in the video description. But back to your question, I mean, I don't think there's one solution, right? I think that depending on if you're the head of IT for, I don't know, we're in Switzerland, so like Migros, or if the head of IT for Nike, you have different needs based on what you're trying to do, then maybe it makes sense to use the entire services from one cloud because they are very good at what you need to do. But my instinct would be to try to stay as much agnostic as you can from an API standpoint.
I really like that sentence when you said you need to be agnostic, and I think we need this one here. And that's well, it's a topic that we also address with our customers. Try to reduce the vendor lock-in, be agnostic, have tools to really be independent and stay independent. That's also what open source is about. So
exactly.
I think that's very important.
Yeah, exactly.
What do you think about maybe trying the second whiskey?
Going back home?
Yeah.
Oh, that's Swiss.
That's a Swiss one, actually.
Oh, wow.
So Lukas, would you also introduce
I can take care of that.
what Annie bought us here? And
So we have a small flag up here that says Swiss Alpine Whiskey.
Alpine.
So this is the Sentis Malt Himmelberg. It's a Swiss single malt matured in used wooden beer casks, and then a second maturation in wine casks from sherry and port to Merlot. So this is fruity, has a lot of spice and wood aroma. Sounds pretty interesting.
What did you think about this one?
I love it.
Very good.
Very good.
Probably not as good as the Swiss one, but
We'll see.
we'll see. Anyway,
Cheers.
glass on glass. Right?
Glass on glass. Cheers. Cheers, Lucas. When we talk about developing software, something that always is a pain point is security. And most of the CIOs struggle to see that the complexity and also being sure about security in the whole development process. And lately, SUSE also acquired NeuVector or NeuVector, however you pronounce that. And we also saw that one of the first steps was to open source that code base. So first of all, big shout out to that. It's really nice to see that this is still possible in this very complex world today. And we were wondering how complex was it to actually open source that, like from a legal perspective, from a technical perspective. Can you elaborate a little bit the story there?
So yeah, thank you. So NeuVector, I think we did that in December 2021. So yeah, we closed the merger, the acquisition in December 21, and we knew that we were going to open source it. So during and in January it was on GitHub. So it took us literally 4 or 5 weeks. But it came with we did some due diligence, right? So we did some work to look at the code before the acquisition to see what it was doing and what we could do with that. So as long as you're not using libraries or components that are not going to be open source license friendly, it's actually pretty easy to open source something, technically. Now you need to make that decision from a business standpoint and understand why you're making that decision first. And what comes next is actually once it's open sourced, you also need to actually use open source for what it is. And so if you continue to develop outside your open source version, then it's pointless as well. So you need to actually use that as your base to continue to evolve your products. And then that's step one of open sourcing, right? And then step two, sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't make sense. You should consider a neutral home, like a foundation, because it depends on your goals, right? But to me, the value of open source is getting contributions and getting people to use it, but also getting people to extend something that's maybe was not part of your use case or that you don't have the expertise for. And so for that, usually you need a good governance model. You need to give up some of the control. Or maybe you keep the control for the part you need, but you need to open the discussion and make things transparent for attracting people if that makes sense for them to join, right?
Yeah. Open source is about the community. The code is a very important part of that, but it really becomes open source in our understanding of open source if there's really a community behind it that is driving the project forward.
So before we come to the next question, I give you a minute to think about maybe the answer. Can you explain what is cool about NeuVector and my developers and security folks should actually do it or use it?
Yeah.
And I leave you some minutes to think about that while I actually open the third poll.
Lucas, you have to read number 3.
Yeah. I have to read the number 3 while you're thinking about your answer.
It's 25 pages long. Good luck.
Oh God.
But the good thing is that Annie has a really nice handwriting, so it's actually easy to read.
Good. So this is the Aran. This is the strongest one we have here with 50%. The initial maturation is in oak casks for 8 years. It's completed in a second maturation in port cask, so port wine. It has a complex mix of vanilla spice, ripe citrus, and dried fruit and nut flavors. Oh God. As well as mandarin citrus with fudge and honey tones. God, they're becoming even longer. What do you expect from us?
A glass. Thanks.
So NeuVector.
Yes, what is cool about it? Why should developers and security folks use it?
So that and security is always a big topic, right? And that's, we've been long enough in the industry to know that we always put security as a big topic and it always comes last. So, but that's not something enterprise can ignore. You have to get it right at some point. And clearly cloud native suffers from, there are plenty of gaps. Coming from Linux, some of my Linux engineers, when this were seeing what cloud native was, they were horrified. I'm going to use that because I saw it.
Yes, I know where it is.
Like Docker Hub, right? And I'm not saying that because of Docker, obviously. They've done fantastic things, but so like software supply chain, now it has changed a lot. There's a lot of focus on cloud native security, scanning container images, scanning registries, but it has become like the top concerns of enterprise. I don't know if you see that, Lukas, in your customers. When they adopt cloud native, then you have the CIO or the head of security and they say, well, what about security for that? And
well, we have two problems in that area. The one problem we have with those security folks is they're not up to date anymore.
yeah,
They're secure. The way that they envision security is a very old school way with firewalls and stuff like that, and just put safeguards everywhere, and then we're safe. And then if you're very lucky, you have a team of new, motivated security folks that understand the new challenges that come with the whole cloud native world, and that understand that the most important person that needs to be happy is the developer.
yeah.
And that means they are aware that the whole security process needs to be part of the development process. And so we need tools that work there.
Very good segue. So like NeuVector, it does a lot of things, like, but really to me and to a lot of people, I think, the key differentiator or the key unique feature that NeuVector brings is at the networking level. So we do deep packet inspection, like layer 7 type of inspection between containers, pods, the traditional ingress, egress stuff, but also at the pod and container level. Like it's almost like you can see everything, right? So which means that you can have very detailed policies. You need to automate that. Nobody has time to actually do that by hand.
And
So
nobody can know it from the get-go.
Exactly. So you need to also like to auto learn those kind of things. That's what really NeuVector does in a unique way.
What do you think about jumping to the next topic, which also is very interesting in terms of what Rancher has to offer? The world is talking about IoT, the edge. Maybe we can briefly talk about this.
We're picking up a topic that you already said before. K3S is good for edge computing. There are probably different understandings of what edge computing is right now. But what I see is, I'm assuming edge computing really on the full edge, where we're talking about spotty network connections and things like that, and machines that you have no physical access to or things like that, and no direct control over. So what are the challenges that you see arise in that area?
The way we look at edge at SUSE is like anything that is not purely running in a public cloud or not purely running in your corporate data center, right, which is still very vague, but that's pretty much how we look at that. And then and we could discuss about that. So you have near edge, that's near the public clouds, near the data center, and then you have far edge, that's the low energy sensor, like it's even tiny edge. So there's like a spectrum like that. And between far and near edge, actually the lineation is the network. So when you have the telcos and you start to enter the WAN and the LAN, that's where we say, well, near edge, it's private network kind of, and WAN is still part of the near edge. When you talk about edge, you talk about, for instance, thousands of shops, and inside shops you have dozens of cash machines or self-checkouts now at the Walmart or like Migros in Switzerland. And so you have like a scale challenge coupled with a security challenge as well, because it's not like under a private public cloud or data center locked physically. Anybody can go to your self-checkout in your cinema or a supermarket, plug a USB stick, and so you have a very strong security challenge there. Well, you need automation. You need to also have something very simple and self-contained. And it's not only software, it's also hardware. So we are working with some of our hardware partners to have SDO, so like to secure not only the software, but the hardware and where it's running and the entire package. So we're working on, for instance, Rancher managing K3S, the OS, and working with the hardware vendors to manage the firmware as well, and sign all of that so that you ensure that whatever is being delivered to a shop is secured, including the hardware itself. And then you need a proxy of some sort to host the updates or the patches, so that if the network goes down, you can actually still update locally in the private network, in a way.
And one of the use cases for edge computing is also cars. Cars are becoming basically driving computers. Is that an area where SUSE is active in?
Linux has been in cars for many years on the entertainment part, but Linux is still not really well adopted for safety, for the critical parts of the driving of cars and self-driving, but also like the sensors, and that's due to some regulations around safety that are pretty strong in the automotive industry. That's not the only industry like that, but it's particularly strong in the automotive industry. So we've been working. You're looking for something. See that?
Well, go ahead.
So we've been working with partners like Electrobit, who is actually very involved and engaged in that industry, to certify Linux, safety certify Linux for automotive, not only for like the radio and the entertainment, but for the driving parts. And so now the new BMW i something, the new iX3 or whatever, the electric cars, they are actually coming with pieces of SUSE Linux inside, yeah. So I'm being careful, like those things cannot have bugs. But it's been a long time since, we cannot really have downtime with Linux because like stock markets are running on Linux, healthcare devices are running on Linux, like life critical, not only mission business critical, but life critical things. And that, to me, that's also. We were talking about edge, right? So if your sensors in your cars, they have to go back to a public cloud to decide if the kids crossing the street in front of you
not gonna work.
is close or far enough, like it's that, no, right? Even if low latency network, 5G, no 5G, no, right? So we need to have a very close feedback loop for those kind of edge use cases. And that's very interesting. So we have a lot of partnerships with car automotive vendors there as well.
We talked about the mobile part of edge computing, and this is more closer to the what you would call near edge or whatever, Harvester.
Yeah.
So really one of those solutions where another big proprietary company has been the main driver, and is one of the solutions that is used everywhere. And Harvester is one of the solutions that SUSE recently announced. What can you tell us about that? Where do you see the value proposition for that?
So there's almost two ways to look at that. There's like an hyper-converged infrastructure angle to it. I'm looking at it more from like running some simple VMs in a Kubernetes environment. That's how I'm looking at it, right? And so it's actually not completely replacing. I wouldn't claim that with Harvester. So Harvester is using a combination of KubeVirt, Rancher. You can have Longhorn for storage as well, and there are some networking elements of that. So I wouldn't claim that it's replacing the entire traditional virtualization stack. And that's not what it is about. To me, it's more about when you run cloud native, largely cloud native applications, and you still have a few VMs, then maybe you could have that one stack, one platform to combine both. And that's not only cheaper, it's simpler. You don't need to operate two platforms. You can combine them. And I think that's going to evolve. The way I'm looking at that as well, to me, it's a good way to transition your IT. Because if you have on the same platform virtualized workloads, containerized workloads, then it's easier to move virtualized workloads over time when it makes sense to containers progressively. If they're running on the same platform, you don't have to think about the platform itself. You only have to think about the workload, which is complicated enough, right? But at least it simplifies the migration journey, and you can keep running both for a while as well, right? So, yeah. And so that's very interesting. I think it's still also pretty early, but we have actually very large enterprises running Harvester and working with us to develop it?
Well, I have something to guess for you. I guess my first Linux distribution and my current Linux distribution, and I will put the fourth.
The first one, I don't know, Slackware.
I'm old, but not that old.
Ubuntu.
SUSE.
SUSE. Oh.
5.3.
Oh my God.
Yes, that was
a
in
while ago.
early stage.
When was that, like late 90s?
Yeah, 1998, I guess,
Yeah.
so 1999, something like that.
So this is number 4. This is a Lagavulin 16 years, kilned with a high smoke content in the malt and then matured to perfection in bourbon and sherry casks. It also has a maritime note, intense, smoky sherry and vanilla. My favorite whiskey. That's why it is here.
Oh, really? You like Lafroig as well? Right?
Cheers.
Yeah.
Cheers. So we talked a lot about cloud native topics, and when I was still working in IT projects, I often encountered SUSE Manager, and I especially like how SUSE is also embracing all the other distributions, and it's able to actually manage other vendors with SUSE Manager, and it's very versatile nowadays, and helps to really manage a growing fleet of different Linux servers. And I was wondering if you can explain a little bit what you're trying to achieve there with SUSE Manager, where you're heading there, and maybe also if there is a connection to Rancher in the future to manage Kubernetes, which is some kind of the same problem. Can you explain a little bit there?
Sure, absolutely. Obviously, SUSE Manager can do SUSE Linux Enterprise, OpenSUSE, but also RHEL, CentOS, Ubuntu, Debian, Rocky, Alma, Amazon Linux. I mean, the list is very long because we want to. We need to add your Linux. Like,
Yes.
Let's have a discussion after.
Yes.
If you can add your Linux into SUSE Manager, it might be a use case.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, and because that's what people need. And I don't think it makes sense to have a management tool that only manages our stuff.
We also encounter SUSE Manager often when we are dealing with SAP customers to manage bigger SAP landscapes, and traditionally SUSE was a very strong partner with SAP, and I think SUSE still has the biggest market share to run SAP workloads out there. Can you explain a little bit why SUSE is the perfect fit for SAP workloads?
We've actually optimized Linux itself at the kernel level to run. So SAP HANA, it's in-memory computing. And before some of the changes we've done to Linux, the Linux kernel was the master of the memory management. And it doesn't go well with in-memory computing from a user space application. So you have to actually balance that to make sure that HANA is not overruled by the kernel, depending on what's going on in your system, right? Mm-hmm. So SUSE has developed things to make sure that SAP workloads were optimized with Linux. Mm-hmm. And still up to today, if you look at, there's actually agnostic benchmark where you can check, well, SAP is only certified on a few Linux distributions. That's step one, because they certified the entire stack. And then you look at the benchmark as well for performances and stability, and that tells you that, well, SUSE is by far, and that's the only relevant choice. There are other workloads where I would even argue that you might want to use different Linux. It doesn't really matter if you run your blog or WordPress, right? But if you run SAP, you would be, I would be concerned to run something else than SUSE Linux. And that's because we innovate together. So when the SAP develops stuff, they develop on top of us. And we're doing the same now with actually Kubernetes, because they start to containerize some of their applications. In-memory computing containerized, that's going to be tricky. Mm-hmm. It's a bit too close to the hardware, but they are containerizing their data lake or some of their user interface, like more front-end type of applications. And we also developed that very closely to K3s or RKE to optimize the workload with the software infrastructure.
Well, I think we touched a lot of topics, but there is still one question out there that we really need to answer now. How does Dr. T, as you're called, pronounce SUSE?
So we will put a link. There's a very funny video about that.
Yeah, I know it.
You saw it, right?
Yeah.
So I don't speak German very well, but so I would say SUSE.
Yeah.
That's.
But the video says SUSE. more or less.
Yeah, because we're like trying to get the Americans to pronounce
I
it
see.
correctly
Yeah.
and it's tough.
Next time we will sing that song, okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
After 6 bottles of whiskey.
Yeah, let's just
Something like that.
empty all of them and
Yeah.
then let's sing a bit.
But with that, I would say thanks a lot. We talked about a lot and we could probably go on for hours. We still have plenty to drink here, but I think we will stop the recording for now. But it was a pleasure to have you here. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot,
Thanks a lot
team.
to Bickel or Lukas Bickel, who made this very nice application to entertain us a little bit. Thanks a lot for your very interesting insights into one of the leading open source companies out there that really also powers a lot of things that we are using in our day-to-day business. It's a pleasure to work with companies like you. Thanks for putting a lot of code into the open to also foster this open source spirit. And last but not least, thanks to you, thanks to Annie, thanks to the whole film crew. And I think with that, I wish you all a very nice day, afternoon, and then talk to you soon in the next open talk from Adfinis. Thanks.
Thank you.